On this episode of the Second Swing Thoughts podcast, back in studio, talking about some new things on the PGA Tour, both Tour Championship format. We've got a new winner and a new what's in the bag to look at. We've also got Tyler Fitzel joining to talk about wedge fitting. And we get a lot of questions about how wedge fitting happens in the studios at our Second Swing fitting bays. So we have Tyler joining us to talk about how that works and why it's important to get fit for your wedges. So that and a lot more on this episode of the Second Swing Thoughts. Hey golfers, Drew Mulhold here in studio with Second Swing Golf for another episode of Second Swing Thoughts. Sean Bauer, co-host, is with as well. Sean, we got a fun episode here. We got some new things to discuss. I'm excited for one particular item that we'll discuss involving a scorecard. Oh, yeah. We'll get to that later on, but yeah, this is going to be a good one. We have Tyler joining later, talk about wedge fitting, and we haven't put a lot of these on the YouTube channel. Probably something we should do is like film a wedge fitting in the bay because, you know, we've done a lot of iron fittings, a lot of driver fittings, and that's because those kind of get the most attention. But something that, and Tyler touches on it, how important it is, it's probably something we should hit on as well, is the process. And so he at least outlines it for us today.
Yeah. Tyler sat down with us and, you know, he kind of broke everything down from, you know, explaining what wedge bounce and grind are, because I think that's pretty much every golfer. Mm-hmm. A lot of golfers still aren't completely sure what exactly, you know, the bounce number means, what exactly the different grinds do. So he does a great job there, kind of how they fit into, you know, different bounces and grinds, gapping your wedges, you know, is it the standard 4 degrees or how they go about that. So really good stuff from Tyler. Kind of answering a lot of questions that, you know, the fitters get asked a lot, or even people in our stores. So he'll break that down here in a minute. But first, let's get right into the turn. We had the Colonial this week. Mm-hmm. Drew, you were down there for a little bit. Getting some cool stuff done there. And we had Ben Griffin with a win. Second win of the season, second career PGA Tour win, but first individual because he teamed up with Andrew Novak for the Zurich about a month ago. It's been a good month for Ben. He was kind of able to hold off the field there. You know, he looked like he was going to comfortably go way, and then kind of came back to the field, and things definitely got interesting.
But he's been playing a lot of good golf, and we said this when he won the team event at Zurich, you know, a few weeks ago, that he had been knocking on the door of a tour victory for a while now, and so, you know, he kind of breaks through here, so to speak, for the individual win, and he does, as we've discussed, have a very fun what's in the bag, or a fun set of clubs. Most notably, for me, leading off is the G430 Max 10K, which in the driver, which I think, you know, I played last year, I loved it, and you don't see a lot of guys going for the ultra high MOI driver models on tour, but he does, and it works for him clearly. So that's kind of interesting to me. And then obviously he has a fun set of Mizuno irons. That's kind of a combo of two models as well that we should talk about, with JPX 923 Tour and the Mizuno Pro S3 new series this year. So that's a fun one. I know he's on Mizuno's staff there, but in terms of like a blend of kind of tour level irons, that's about as good as you can get there with those two.
Yeah, he's got a really fun bag. One, like you said, you don't see a ton of, you know, the G430 Max 10Ks on tour. You also don't see a ton of Mizuno irons. For as good as Mizuno irons are, they just don't have the staff players that, you know, a lot of others have. And I like the little combo he's going there with the, you know, the 923 Tour and the Pro S3s. So really cool bag. And then he's got the new Mizuno wedges in his bag. So definitely a fun, you know, a more unique bag. I think Larry Bobka will approve with him having the UST shafts in there on the driver and the wood there. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of, you know, with that G430 Max 10K, I was just trying to look this up here. Driving distance, you know, he averaged 308 off the tee, 55th in the field, but you're averaging 308 off the tee. You're going to be doing pretty good. He was 16th in strokes gained off the tee. Putting, you know, he plays that Concept 2 Tour prototype there from Scotty Cameron. He was third in the field in strokes gained there. Around the green 11th, approach the green 31st. So kind of an all-around performance with that bag, all-around performance for the tournament, and he's now a 2-time PGA Tour winner. And I believe does that have him now tied with Rory, Scotty, and who just won the other week? As the only 2-time winners on tour, or multiple-time winners
For this year?
For this year, yeah.
Just
Because Scotty has 2, Rory has 2.
is it Sepp Straka?
Sepp, yeah, that's who it is. Sepp, and now Ben Griffin.
He has been on this upward trajectory, so it's not like he is a guy who the last couple of years you maybe have seen him pop up in a top 5, top 10 occasionally, but he wasn't kind of consistently up there. And I think you've seen this more consistently pushing towards the top of leaderboards this year, and then breaking through at an event like this, where his game is kind of demanded. Not a huge surprise, but also really good for him because he's got a cool story about, hey, he had some tough times with his game and trying to make it in pro golf, and there's the story where he not completely gave up, but he almost put his career on pause to kind of basically get him out of a financial hole, and he was able to restart his career, and obviously that was the best thing happening for him, is it kind of revitalized him, so to speak, and now he's PGA Tour winner times 2.
Yeah, and he, with 2 wins, he's probably on his way to qualifying for this year's Tour Championship.
Yeah.
And speaking of the Tour Championship, the PGA Tour just announced some changes to this year's event.
Which it is wild that they do this in the middle of a season.
Yeah. Can you imagine any other sport doing
I know.
that?
I was, as someone who's active on X or Twitter, you see the kind of the discourse out there, and it is wild to think about if they changed, in a drastic manner, the format to the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or the NHL Stanley Cup Final. It's a wild, decision to make and do that right in the middle of the season. But nonetheless, I don't mind the changes. So the idea is it's basically going to be a 72-hole stroke play format. They're doing away with the starting strokes altogether. But so kind of almost going back to the way it was in a sense, where if you're in the top 30, you qualify for the Tour Championship and you start at the same spot as number 1 in the standings. But it sounds like the course format and conditions are going to change a lot. So they're going to try and make East Lake a lot tougher, a lot more of a risk-reward play style with some of the holes, and basically kind of cater it more towards an entertainment, a lens through to entertain the viewers rather than necessarily as a golf tournament. It seems like there's a change there. Feedback from the Fan Forward initiative is what they're citing. So it should be more interesting, and I think it also will bring a little more theater because the current format, or the format that they had used last several years, you started the tournament with like 4 or 5 guys that really could have had a chance, and now you got, in theory, 30 guys that are right there at least to start the tournament.
Yeah, and it's more in line with other sports, right? Like you reward for a strong regular season. You're Scotty Scheffler, you're going to be at the Tour Championship. You're winning enough, right?
Yeah.
So you get that reward, you automatically qualify for it, essentially. But it makes it so, it's like you got to perform your best in this specific tournament. It's no different than, it doesn't mean that, I think they were trying to make it so that the player that was the best throughout the season had the best chance of winning it to kind of reward them. But I think you almost got to look at it like a major, where it's like, having a great regular season is still good. You can still win Player of the Year, but for this specific tournament, we want to make it a big tournament. We want it to be competitive. We want everyone that's in it to have a shot, a realistic shot at winning. I think it's great. I still wish they would maybe throw in a little match play. I'm not saying the whole tournament, but like find a way that they kind of similar to what they do with like the U.S. Amateur, where it's you have a stroke play portion of the top, was it 32 or whatever, and then the top, was it 16 or top 8 guys then advance and they play for, just to bring a little match play back into the PGA Tour. But I think this is definitely kind of reverting back to what they used to do, the way to go, because I do agree. I think the Tour Championship was kind of boring when they changed it.
Yeah. I think there's part of that where the players maybe don't want, like the match play just inherently involves a lot more golf. So, I was thinking about it. If they were to have, let's say there's 30 players, you do stroke play for 2 days, and you cut it at like 8. So then the top 8 do a bracket style the final 2 days. But that still means you're playing a ton of golf the rest of the way. That's 36 holes each day if you're going to do the round of 8, round of 4, and then you do a championship. I mean, that's a ton of golf that you're going to throw in.
18 more
so
holes.
18, 36, 18 other holes.
18 more holes in a 72-hole tournament.
Right.
Theoretically. Obviously.
Smashing it into, 4 days. Maybe the players don't love that idea. as a fan, I just want to see some match play.
Yeah.
And I know it's imperfect, and there's probably other reasons I'm not considering, but we don't get enough match play. Ryder Cup, President's Cup, I always love to see how the players manage things differently, and it would be kind of fun. But it is what it is. Overall I like the changes, and if they set up the course the way they say they're going to, which is more difficult, with some more risk reward and some kind of more fun, maybe short par fours or risky, go for it in 2 par fives, I'll be on board.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that's PGA Tour. Let's move to the AJGA.
Yeah.
At a team TaylorMade event, a name you're probably pretty familiar with, at least last name, Woods. Charlie Woods he's actually had himself quite a tournament, but he had himself quite the opening round. Scorecard, he ended up shooting a 2 under 72, but he had 3 pars.
This is I'm a big fan of the crazy scorecards.
Yeah, me too. I like them a lot.
And it's also a little reminiscent to how I play sometimes at obviously a much lower level and some much easier golf courses than these guys are playing. But here, I'm just going to rattle off all 18 holes here in a row. Charlie went birdie, bogey, triple to start, then birdie, bogey, birdie. So I don't even know what that is anymore. But his first par of the day was on hole 7, par 3, with a 3. And then birdie to finish the front 9 with a 36 even par. So he had 5 birdies on the front 9, and he shot even par, which is fun. Back 9 starts with 2 bogeys, then an eagle to get it back to even, then birdie, par, and then a bogey on a par 5 18th for a round of 200 par 70. So in total, he had 8 birdies and an eagle, and shot a 2 under par 70.
Yeah,
that's fun golf.
Yeah,
you never know what you're going to get.
Hey, I would take that scorecard all day. I mean, 2 under is 2 under.
I know. I'm with you. It's just
mine's usually, last time I played, it was an 81, and that had 4 birdies for me, which is really good. And then I finished with 3 straight doubles. So I would just give me a few more birdies, and I'm happy. And yeah, that's a fun round. And yeah, I think he was second in the event with tied with Miles Russell, who is kind of that young teenage phenom down there.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the live leaderboard as of right now. So today, as we're recording, is Wednesday the 28th. This is the last day of the tournament. Charlie Woods is T2 right now, 1 back of the lead. And looks like that final round is underway. He's through 2 holes. So he and Miles Russell are both right there at T2. Luke Colton from Frisco, Texas is currently in the lead as of this moment.
Yeah. So. Speaking of underway, as we are recording this podcast, Mr. Kevin Kraft is in the final qualifying for the U.S. Senior Open, playing down in North Carolina, trying to earn one of these 7 spots at that qualifier to make it would be 4. This would be his 4th out of 5, which is
impressive.
Wish Kevin some luck. Hopefully he can make it again, and I know we'll be keeping a close eye on that. But that wraps up the turn here, and now let's get into our featured interview with Mr. Tyler Fitzel.
Yeah, Mr. Tyler Fitzel back to talk about wedge fitting. Again, always great to hear his insights. And again, touching on a subject that I think probably needs some more attention. So really good insights here from Tyler.
Now welcoming on the Second Swing Thoughts podcast, it is master fitter Tyler Fitzel. And who better to bring in to talk about wedges than the wedge magician himself. How are we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing really well. Razor sharp, actually. Razor sharp.
All right. So before we get into the deep dive into some of these fitting questions, what wedges are you playing this year?
Yeah. Oh man.
Or what wedges have you played? I guess.
Yeah. Let's go there. Okay, that's easier. So, SM10. I've got some Vokies. Played the new King Cobra 2025 wedges. Love those. Trying to give those kind of a real, put them through the paces type. Very interesting. I don't think I've had Cobra before, so that's been kind of cool. The new Mizuno wedges. So I've got a bunch of the T1s and did some different colors there. So I got a blue, a black, and just one of their white satins. I found a lot of really good success. I've been, wedges are typically very easy for me, just as like I'm comfortable with them. I've kind of got my practice, my routine, and, shot is a shot. So, but yeah, doing really well.
All right, yeah, well, we're that's awesome to hear, and we're gonna kind of get deep into some common fitting questions and kind of dive deeper into, wedge fitting because they are your scoring clubs. Whether you're attacking greens to set up birdies or just scrambling. These are some of the most important clubs in your bag. So I guess just to start off, something very most of our fitting bays are indoor fittings, right?
Yes.
Obviously, golf is played outside primarily. How do you fit wedges inside?
Yeah, the wedge game is unique in that obviously there's a lot of different conditions that we have to use. Also, the idea that a wedge is not necessarily a full swing club, right? I kind of tell people you might have to go from 5 feet to like 55 yards. So using one club, but differently all the way around. We do like to use more of a full swing in the hitting bay to try to get just a general idea about what some of the distances, the height or launch angle, the spin rate. I go back to the 4 things that happen to a golf ball: ball speed, launch, spin, and direction. So those 4 things influence what's going on. That's how we look at wedges as well. Indoors, we don't have the dirt, which is one where you'd say, how does this interact with the turf? But we also don't have temperature to worry about. We don't have weather to worry about or bugs or, those types of things. And so when we're indoors, we get a really good handle on what they're going to do as a baseline. But the game is played outside, so you have to get outside and play it. That's where fittings indoor take away variables. Outside, you add those variables back in and see what's going on.
Yeah, and so speaking of turf interaction, that's all about the wedge grind, the bounce.
Yep.
First, let's start off. Wedge grind and bounce. Everyone hears it. You hear, low bounce, high bounce. You have all the different kinds of grinds. Whether it's leading edge, trailing edge. Trimmed some stuff off. What exactly is wedge grind? What exactly is wedge bounce?
So let's start with bounce. And bounce is really just the curvature or the amount of curvature on the bottom of a club. So you have the leading edge of the wedge that gets down into the turf. The bounce is usually dictated primarily by what type of attack angle we see. Is somebody move that aggressively downward? If you move downward a lot, we want the bounce on the bottom of the club to be higher to help that club come back out, right? So into the turf, out of the turf. If we have someone that's maybe a little bit more neutral, we might have a more middle number to bounce. So say, for instance, 14 is usually a very high bounce number. Then you got about 10, and then you've got about 8. You can get into some that are even like 6. But when we start talking about what you do with the club, the bounce number is a lot more about the type of attack angle that you present. How are you bringing that club down into the turf? Now, when it's in the turf, the grind comes into play in terms of what you'd like that club to do in the turf. So, for instance, we shave some off of the heel or the toe, or we kind of have an area that on the backside, we call it trailing relief. You might take a bunch off the backside so that the club can get down and in and then back out again. There's some other unique grinds. Tiger Woods has one from TaylorMade Wedge right now that's kind of unique. There's a pre-worn sole. It's got a higher bounce number, but the pre-worn sole gets it to sit down so it can act like a lower bounce number. Then there's the middle part on the bottom. That acts like a higher bounce number. Then there's the shaved off on the back, which again acts like a lower bounce number. So depending on whether you open or close it, you can get something that performs differently depending on how you use it. So the bounce is really about, how you get that club in there and how you want to get it back out. But the turf interaction itself depends on the grind. Yeah.
Okay, so when players coming in for a wedge fitting, and obviously, like you said, you're looking more at full swings, but how do you kind of determine, an ideal bounce and grind combination that they should be playing?
Yeah, I like to use the idea of wet sand versus dry sand. Generally or typically, we're going to be using a wedge out of sand. So when I have something that's very wet, very firm, I don't want a lot of bounce because what'll happen is it'll get down into that firm turf and it will bounce it back up. And if I have a lot, I want a lot when I need a lot. And so that's where you start to kind of differ the amount of bounce or the different types of grinds. I like to look at the highest lofted club that you're going to carry generally should have about the least amount of bounce, so that if I need a very short shot or like a chip shot, I can get the club underneath as much as possible so that the ball, the club doesn't bounce and kind of hit the middle of the ball. And then the other side of that too is if you were to get into sand, it might be really heavy sand or very fluffy sand. If I have something without bounce, it's going to keep digging in. So the club almost continues to get stuck in the sand. That's the same thing that happens when we start talking about a very firm lie on top of like a lot of grass. So we can talk about like thick grass. We can talk about bare grass or bare ground. We can talk about turf that is very, very cut down, very thin and very firm. And so we have all these conditions. Generally, even in a round of golf, you might see 3 different conditions, from firm to maybe a little bit softer to something, in the sand that might be fluffy. So you want to be able to have versatility. And that's one of the reasons why we look at different clubs having different bounce and grind options. So say, for instance, the highest loft, if I'll carry a 60 or even a 62, when I have that for a purpose so that I can use it in certain situations where, generally speaking, I use something like a 56 degree for just pretty much all around purpose type chipping. And then we see a lot of people will come in with maybe really high bounce in the high number and really low bounce in a lower number. That's okay too if that combination fits what you're trying to achieve. Another thing too is it's not just the bounce and the grind itself, it's really how you use it. When the club is in motion and you're trying to get down into that turf, you might only make kind of one move with it, which is fine. You just have a general square it up and go down and through. And that's where you might find someone who just needs, let's say, for instance, a 10-degree bounce on all of the clubs, because you're not trying to manipulate it. You just prefer setting up and just moving the club the same way. So having the same bounce is great because you're just going to try to move it that way. We're being functional with the type of club you've got in your hand, but of course it's for a reason.
All right, so there's wedge bounce grind. Now we're going to kind of move into, loft, right?
Yeah.
I think for a while there, the standard was always 52, 56, 60, kind of 4 degrees, separated. Obviously, as lofts on irons have changed, so have the lofts that you're seeing in, your gap wedges, your sand wedges, your lob wedges. I guess, where do you where do you base, what lofts a player should play? I know 4 degrees is kind of the standard for when you're gapping them, but how do you kind of determine, all right, well, 4 degrees here works, but we need actually a 6-degree gap based on what?
Yeah, if you go online with any of the wedge companies themselves and they'll talk about, how to select a wedge, one of the first questions every company will ask you is, what's the loft of your pitching wedge? And they do that because they want to be able to gap, like you mentioned. Is it 4 degrees, 5 degrees, 6 degrees? Heaven forbid you'd have an 8, a 9, or even a 10-degree gap. But these are things that I see with customers. Will come in and they'll have, a pitching wedge at 45, and then all of a sudden they'll have a 58 degree, and it's the only wedge they've got. That's not right or wrong. It's what you've got. For those that know me or have, when I was down to Titleist years ago, we were lucky enough doing testing and training that Bob Vokey came out and was actually doing our training and talking about bounce and talking about grind and talking about flighting and the types of clubs. So I volunteered. I got up and he said, okay, what's the pitching wedge? I have a 46. I hit 5 shots. And he says, what's next? It's a 56. That's what I played. I played a 10-degree gap. Of course, he's like, what in the world? But I hit about 5 shots. And again, the gap or spacing was like 15 yards, which is kind of what we're looking for. And then I said I play a 62, and it was another 15 yards. He's like, okay, well, so from a full swing perspective, I have 3 wedges in the bag, a pitching wedge, then 2 others. Now I've changed that up, and I hadn't changed it up until even last year. And then what I did was, by looking at the loft of the pitching wedge, where I was playing a 44 degree, now that's way too big a gap to go to a 56. So I got to put something else in, and what I did is I put in a 48. And that 48 has become an absolute perfect club because now it actually fits a specific distance still of about 15 yards. And so that's one of the things that we have to look at. Do I want a gap wedge in my set? So something that I say is, if you've got a club that is built like an iron for the iron set, it just says wedge on it. Usually there's at least a pitching wedge that's like that, and then there's another one. When we start looking at the types of wedges to put in, it would be, where's this wedge going to benefit us? If I'm going to use a 48-degree chipping around the green, I'm probably going to want a wedge, not necessarily an iron. So that's one of the things that I look at is, well, what's the pitching wedge? What's the space that we want? How much? And then what kind of club would fit best there? So if I'm talking about a gap wedge, it could be a full swing, but if you're going to be someone that also would like to use it for chipping around the green or for some, more delicate shots, that's where I would probably put a wedge in rather than an iron. Okay. The other side of that becomes, your spacing or your gapping to that. It can be a tricky one because it doesn't have to be a set number, right? You can go from, like I went from 48 to 56 to 62. It's not an absolute perfect gapping, but from that perspective, it still gives me what I'm looking for. And so one of the things that I tell people is like, where are you going to use this? I want to know, how is this going to get used? So that would be kind of the main breakdown. If I have to pick between a gap wedge or an iron wedge, I need to know where it's being used. That becomes a little bit more unique for each person.
Yeah, and that's actually something when I went through my fitting last year, I ended up kind of testing out because I was, I had an old Callaway set and just, back when I was 18, I didn't know anything. So I was like, all right, 52, 56, 60, let's get it. We had them there for Vokies, whatever. Well, then I went in there and that was kind of the same question you asked me is, well, what do you use your gap wedge for? For me, it was strictly just full swings.
Yep.
And so for my game, it was like, it kind of made sense once he pointed out. He's like, well, then why don't you just play the iron gap wedge? Yep. He's like, it gives you that little extra forgiveness. If all you're using it for is full swings. Yeah. He was like, it just gives you a little more leeway versus, if I'm going with then my 56 was always, Vokey SM8. And he was like, if you're using that for, chipping and all that stuff around the green, he's like, you want that little more versatility with the club. So
correct. Yep.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. So we've gotten wedge bounce, we've gotten wedge grind, we've gotten wedge loft. Now we're going to get into, and we talked about the gap wedge. We had Austin Eckroad on the channel last week, and he kind of went through his bag. And one of the clips that went on social media, he talked about, he's switching out his 60-degree every 3 weeks, right? Which those guys practice an insane amount. But when should, what do you look for in a player that, all right, it's time to upgrade the wedge? You're not getting, is it a spin number you're looking for? What do you kind of look for when it's time for them to, make that upgrade because the wedge has just been used too much? Yeah,
it's a great question. I have tended to just hang on to my wedges unless there's some kid that needs some wedges and I go here. It's a lot easier for me where if I've gone through them and I've used them for at least a season, I'll try to go with a new fresh set. But then if I am using different sets through the course of a season, I'll, try to use at least a dozen, if not more rounds before I change to another company to just play those. I want to kind of play them a dozen rounds at a time. I would look at a wedge shot as a lot of the companies tell us you want to switch out when you've gotten through somewhere around 75 to 80 rounds of golf, which means about a half dozen to a dozen shots on a wedge is a round of golf. And if you think about, it's not just I played, if you say 80 times, it's not just that I played with my wedges 80 times this year. You could have played 80 times, but like with the 48, I might have only hit it once a round. So if I'm only hitting it once a round, it's kind of like the irons. If I hit my 7-iron once every other round, I don't need to replace the 7-iron every year. But the players that we talk about at a higher level that are playing a lot of golf, have a lot of shots, they have a lot of practice, they need to go through those. They're also looking for a very, very high amount of spin for control because that's the name of the game for them. But when we start to kind of slide down that scale and say, all right, what level am I at? It's what you feel most comfortable with. And I would look at it as saying, if you play, let's say, for instance, 25 rounds of golf a year, you could probably go at least 3 years, probably, maybe 4, unless you actually start to put, marks and a wear spot on a specific wedge. I was just fitting a professional tour player that was going through his another set of wedges, and the sweet spot was worn out. And I said, when did this get into the bag? And he's like, about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And I'm like, okay. So he's already worn out a wedge. It's what he uses for everything. He loves that wedge. He plays that a lot. Well, that's when you have to look at how much you're using that. The other part of it, too, is if you are practicing, you know, grass is not that big a deal. You're not going to kind of wear down the edges on the grooves with that. But you will if you're in the bunker. And bunker play is something you've got to go practice. So if you get sand and you get that grit and that dirt between ball and the club, it's going to wear that down even faster. I would look at it as saying, if you play 50 times a year, which is quite a lot, you know, on average, it's pretty good. You could probably go at least 2 years, if not 3. If you've got someone that's playing upwards of twice that, around 100, you might want to do it every other year. And then depending on the level of competition, you might want to put a new one in every year. And if you're that type of person that's playing very competitively, you'd probably want to put one in maybe even twice a year. Now, that would be the one you use the most. Now, if you're wearing out, let's say, a 60 and a 56, but you're not really wearing out your 50, well, you don't have to put a new 50 in for the year, but that's where you might want to look at getting another one for the other lofts.
And kind of, you know, final question here as we kind of wrap up this wedge fitting segment. So when you're fitting a golfer and you're kind of getting to, you know, the end, you figured out what kind of gaps they want. Is the brand, is that more just kind of their personal preference, or is there reasons why you would recommend, you know, perhaps a Cleveland RTZ over a Vokey SM10, or, you know, a Callaway or a TaylorMade? Is there more to it than just brand preference when kind of picking out those wedges?
Well, there is, and there's also number one, we want to find a grip. So grip does matter, you know. So if you are using something that's got mid-size or jumbo or standard size or wraps or different types of grips, grip is a part, and that's a part because of swing weight. The shaft matters because the shaft is also a part of swing weight. It does have to do with flex and what you need versus what you might do with it, right? So, and then the other part of it is that club head, and there are a lot of preferences. So to answer your question, yes, when I'm looking at the whole picture, preferences like the manufacturer could be because this one has a certain look. This one's got maybe a more rounded toe. Some companies have a very flat leading edge to it, or a very squared off leading edge. Some companies will even grind those different for you. So that we see this now with some of the companies, including like a Cleveland does this with their wedges. We see Ping does this with theirs. We see Titleist will do it with theirs. So they'll go in and they'll actually do a special grind on it if you have certain preferences. So you might want a certain color so that you don't have glare. You might want a certain look so that you're playing something you're comfortable with. I know right now, TaylorMade, we've just started to see TaylorMade's new, call it quote-unquote, prototype wedge that looks very, very, very similar to another popular wedge out on the tour. And we've already started seeing some comments of, well, this doesn't look the same. I can guarantee you one thing about a Cleveland and a Titleist wedge. They're year after year, they're going to look the same looking down. That doesn't mean the technology is the same. They may be moving weight. They may be using a different material. I know a lot of people this year have said that RTZ feels different because there's a Z alloy that they're using that's softer. It also is kind of like a raw finish to it, but it doesn't rust. So you start talking about the technologies that the companies have. That in and of itself is one reason why someone might come in, hit a Cleveland and say, I really like the Cleveland. The same thing with someone that might come in and hit a Ping and say, hey, this feels softer than this one or this one. And the other part of that, too, is you start looking at the material. Mizuno is, as far as I know, really in the big companies, Mizuno is the only real forged. They have a forging.
Yep.
It's a forging versus the other ones are all high end, but they may not be as soft as that. So there's material differences to it. And I've kind of played across the board. I've had, like I said, right now I have some Mizunos. One, I got the blue one, the blue Ion, and I like it. I don't mind looking at the blue Ion. Yeah, and so The other thing that happens too, from a lot of people's perspective, is we see the players on the tour and their wedges when we kind of get into what's in the bag, and they've got stamps and they've got, writings and sayings and, unique things on the back. And companies picked up on that, and they're doing the same thing now. So you can get a bunch of custom stamping, custom engraving, custom color, custom looks. So I think that all plays into it. And those are just all questions that I have to ask. So, do you have a color preference? Because like some people will come in and get the all black or jet black, and they because they like that, and that's what right now, like Vokey offers their jet black with, and so does Mizuno, but you can get an all black shaft.
Yep.
You can get a blacked out version, if you will.
Yep.
They look cool. When they perform, the function's just the same too.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Tyler. Well, we kind of went through just about everything there. Hope you all enjoyed kind of hearing that from Tyler. Of course, the best way to, find the right wedges for your game is to sign up for a fitting with someone like Tyler or our other master fitters. Yep. They'll get those wedges, the bounce, the grind, the loft, everything dialed in to kind of help you optimize your game. So, Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Well, keep your grooves clean and stay razor sharp.
And that was Tyler Fitzel talking about wedge fitting. And again, as I've said a bunch of times, important to get fit for your wedges, important to play different grinds and bounces in your wedges throughout your set. Good feedback there. And it's just, talk to Larry, talk to Tyler. They will tell you the short game is neglected a little too much by the average golfer when it comes to the equipment. So let's, I'm taking away from that. Go get the short game dialed in, even if it's just checking lofts and lies of your wedges or making sure that they're working for how you use your wedges. It's important to get that dialed in.
Well, and next to your putter, your wedges are probably the clubs you use more than anything, no matter what level you are, because, if you're a little longer, you're usually having wedges into par fours.
Yep.
Even if you're a shorter player, you're using your wedges around the green. Like, you're using them all the time.
Right. Well, I'll add this, too, as part of that. So we, yesterday, filmed a fitting with an NHL player, and so that's a little teaser for what's to potentially come on the YouTube channel here. We filmed it, and he made a note that he has such speed and he has all this power where he uses his same wedge, 58-degree wedge, from 115 yards and in for everything. So, which for a lot of players, if you're off the green, that's a lot of golf shots in a round where you're 115 yards and under, not on the green. That's a lot. So making sure that wedge is fit for how you use the wedge is important. And that's a lot of golf shots in a round. So
yeah, it was good stuff from Tyler. We got some more stuff with him coming up.
Yes.
Talked with him about kind of got his kind of take on some of the trends we're seeing in the golf equipment world and in the fitting world. So stay tuned for that one as well.
Yeah, be more future episode of the podcast. Also with Tyler, we've been doing this live at lunch series. We started last week testing the newest drivers from various brands against some of their older models. So you can go back and watch last week's. We did TaylorMade. We had QI35. We had a TaylorMade M1, and then we had an R7. So we went back kind of 10 years and went back 20 years.
Yeah. Didn't the M1 win for you?
And the M1, I tell you what, was very consistent.
Yeah, that was my prediction when you guys left to go test. I was like, M1's got it.
It was good. It was very good. And it was some weird spin a little bit on that one, but the dispersion was phenomenal. So take a look at that. And then we're doing Titleist this week, Callaway the following week. Then we're going to go Ping and Cobra. So stay tuned. That's 1 p.m. Central on the YouTube channel. We're diving into kind of old versus new driver comparisons. It's a lot of fun. Kind of bring out some nostalgia if you've been following or been in the golf equipment loop for a while. Bringing some old models back and highlighting them a little bit. Also, as Sean alluded to earlier in the episode, I was down at the Charles Schwab Challenge last week down in Texas. In addition to the barbecue, I was able to eat. And I was also able to spend some time on a couple of tour trucks, so we captured some really cool stuff. So clubs being built for guys like Gary Woodland, Victor Hovland. So we're going to be highlighting that stuff in the coming weeks here on the YouTube channel. It was really fun to capture that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and on the second swing side, we still have our major contest going. So kind of our May major contest. You have until May 31st to enter. Head to our social channels. We should have them pinned out there. You can submit your entry online at secondswing.com. And then, as always, check out our best value clubs. Ben Griffin played one of them, Mizuno JPX 923 Tours. great irons, so you can get best prices on, those clubs, Strixons, Pings, you name it. Great deals for a lot of, pretty new models that are in incredible shape. So make sure you check out our best value golf clubs.
Yeah, it's been a great episode. I like this.
It has.
We got a ton more content coming, as we already talked about. Make sure you stay tuned to Second Swing Thoughts podcast. You're subscribed where you listen. You're subscribed where you watch. And we'll see you next week on the Second Swing Thoughts podcast.